Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today I've got a tutorial on how to make Aqua's shirt, collar, and bow from the anime KonoSuba. Yee! As well as I'll have more Aqua tutorials coming soon, so make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can check those out later. Now, let's begin. Starting off with the shirt, and here are all of the tools and materials that I used for making the shirt, and I'll have links to all of it in the description. As well as you can find my pattern for the shirt on my website, link in the description. Now after you print out and tape your pattern together, you will want to place all of the parts onto your blue fabric. And for me, I used a Kona fabric. And after that, just pin them in place and then cut them out. And this will be parts A through G. Then with the help of the instructions where they are labeled on the edges to connect which piece to which, pin them together, and we're gonna go to our sewing machine and sew everything first with a straight stitch, needle on the left, and then we're going to finish off all of those with an overcast stitch to lock all of those threads and prevent them from fraying. And for me, I like to go back onto all of those edges on the inside and iron them flat. Reason being is you're gonna have such more clean edges and you're not gonna have these itchy things on the inside rubbing your skin. And then for extra support, I go back to my sewing machine, and on the front side, I will sew those seams down with a straight stitch. Now, for Aqua's shirt, there are a ton of white trimming throughout the piece, and you can either buy single fold bias tape, 1 inch thick, and also double fold bias tape, 1/2 inch thick, or you can just make it from scratch like I did. And I like to use a white Kona fabric. And basically this is the process where you'll want a ruler and you'll see that I have this laid out into strips against my cutting mat. And for this one, I'm gonna be doing a 1/2 inch double fold bias tape. And for doing this, I do the width of 2 inches, cutting them into long strips, and then I will go and get my iron and I will iron each of the edges over 1/2 inch, which will technically make it a single fold bias tape, but to make it a double fold, you'll want to iron it in half one more time, and that will give you your 1/2 inch double fold bias tape. Then just connect it to all of your trimmings. For this part, I'm specifically doing the armholes first, pinning them in place, and then going to my sewing machine, and we're going to sew it with a straight stitch with our needle on the left. And then for the bottom part of our trim, I'm gonna be doing that where it is a double fold 1 inch bias tape. And if you're gonna make this from scratch, you want this one to be 3 inches wide, and repeat the same process that I mentioned earlier. But unlike the armholes, we do need to do a little bit more steps with this bottom part, because in the very center, the shirt goes up in a triangle-like shape, and we want to mimic that shape with our bias tape. So for this, you're going to want to cut each of your strips slightly longer than what you want to be. I normally do about 1/2 inch, and then you want to cut each of those angles at the same degree. So this one is close to a 45 inch, and you'll cut it, and then you will want to fold them so the inside is facing out and pin them together. And these sections should make a triangle-like shape. Or it may also make a V if you are doing the opposite direction angle. Then with a straight stitch, we are going to sew along that edge and trim off any extra, then flip it inside out, and what should be left is the angle that you want. I highly recommend also going back with your iron and ironing this flat, nice and crisp edges. Then we're gonna repeat this same type of steps for the middle triangle part, the very tip, but this time when we cut it, it is going to turn out to look like a V. Then once again, sew it, and when you're done, you should have this pretty shape. And don't forget to trim off some of the extra parts. Now, before we attach that trim, we need to do the center strip first. And if you want to buy your bias tape, this will be your 1 inch single fold bias tape, Or if you have a 1/2" double fold bias tape, like we made earlier for the armholes, just unfold it and then iron it flat, and now you have a single fold bias tape. Congratulations! Then just pin it down the center part of the shirt and to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew it with a straight inch, starting with the needle on the right. After that's done, you will want to trim the bottom part, and then we can align the bottom trim, pinning it in place. And then back to the sewing machine one more time, sewing it with a straight stitch and our needle on the left. Now to prep for the zipper, and for this we're going to be sewing along the 2 edges at the very back, each individually with our overcast stitch. This will prevent the fabric from fraying any in the future. Then pin those 2 edges together so that way the outside is facing in. Then to our sewing machine, and this time we're going to be using a basting stitch. Now this type of stitch is not meant to be permanent, as we're going to be removing the stitch later on. And after that's done, we're going to grab our iron and we're going to iron those 2 seams flat so they're facing away from each other. So that way next we can pin our separating zipper to this. And side note, you want this zipper to be facing downward so that way you do not see the pulley part. Then back to our sewing machine. This time, don't forget your zipper foot for your machine, and we're gonna be sewing it with a straight stitch, needle on the left going in both directions. And to make this a functional zipper, we will need to get our seam ripper. And that basting stitch that we used earlier, we're going to be using our seam ripper and we're going to be removing that stitch. And this will make it so next our zipper will be able to show and we will be able to pull the zipper pull all the way down and have our shirt separate. And there's just one more step left to completing this shirt, and that is to add our final detail around the neck of our double fold bias tape, and this one is going to be a 1/2 inch. Once again, pin it in place and then you can sew it with a straight stitch, needle on the left, to finish out our shirt. Congratulations! Now onto the collar, and here are all the tools and materials that I used for this, as well as you can find my pattern for this, link in the description. Starting off with the white part of the collar, and you're going to, after printing and taping the pattern together, put it onto your white fabric, and I used a Kona white fabric and traced it including the blue edge part, and then you're going to want to cut it out with some scissors. Then put that to the side and we're going to go on to the blue part. And to make this easy, you can either buy double fold bias tape size 1/2 inch, or you can make it. And we talked about making it in the first part of the video, but if you missed that part of the video, I'll go over it one more time. And basically what we're going to be doing is, with the help of a ruler and our cutting mat, lay the fabric so it follows our lines. And for making a 1/2 inch double fold bias tape, you will want to cut it the width of 2 inches. Then on each of those edges, you're going to grab your iron and fold them inwards. For this, each side should be folded 1/2 inch inwards, and then once that's done, you're going to fold both of those sides in half and iron again, and that will create your double fold bias tape size 1/2 inch. Now for what I think is the most trickiest part of this entire Aqua cosplay, and that is making this trim around this complicated white collar. And whether you bought your bias tape or you made it, it's gonna be the same. And what we're going to be doing is grabbing our strip. We're basically going to be cutting each of these sections where they are the length of that one piece, plus on either side you're going to want to add 1/4 to 1/2 inch of allowance. You want to cut it so it is the same angle that each of those edges are going to hit. And repeat this for all of the blue trim. And I worked this in each of the point sections first. Grabbing the pointed part, you're going to flip them so the insides are facing out and flat, and you're going to pin them together. And each of these pointed parts should be a triangle-like shape. Once that's done, we're going to take each of those pieces to the sewing machine and we're going to sew them with a straight stitch and then trim off any extra. And you should have a piece for each of the points now. And then after that, we're going to connect each of those inner points together, and this time they should each align in a V-like shape. Again, pin them and then sew them with a straight stitch. And once all of them are sewn together, we're going to then grab our iron and we're going to press them all flat. So this way we have our double fold bias tape. And if you did it correctly, each of them should be a point and should look like the outer shape of your collar. Then for the other tricky part, and that is sandwiching the white fabric in between our double fold bias tape. Once you're relatively close, you're going to want to pin it all together and then one more time back to the sewing machine. And then we're going to do another straight stitch, needle on the left. And the last part is to finish off the inner trim, and for this again I'm using a double fold bias tape, size 1/2 inch, pinning it and sewing it with a straight stitch. And the last edges that are still unsewn is the very end that's going to close together. And for this, I wanted to make it so they don't fray anymore. So I used an overcast stitch, followed by folding it 1/2 inch and sewing it flat using a stretch stitch or a lightning bolt stitch. And put that to the side and we'll get back to it later. Next, we're going to talk about the bow part. And for this, you're going to want to put the pattern onto your green fabric. This was another Kona fabric that I was using. And you're going to want to cut out both the top and the bottom part out of green fabric. And you will want to cut out each part twice, as well as repeating this for the yellow part of the bow, cutting each part out twice. Again, I just used another Kona fabric. Next, we're going to grab each of those yellow parts, and on the V section, you're going to want to do a little tick with the scissors about 1/4 inch down, and then we're going to fold it, and we're going to sew that edge using a straight stitch. And this time the needle is going to be on the right. Then grab those yellow parts and pin them to the green part. Make sure your seam is facing down so you do not see it. And we're going to sew around all of the edges of the yellow fabric with a straight stitch needle on the right. Next, you're going to want to pin those sewn pieces together. So this time the yellow should be facing inward and you shouldn't be able to see it. And you're going to pin that closed. As well as for the top part of the bow, you will want to pin those two pieces of fabric together as well. And then we're going to go to our sewing machine and we're going to sew them together. Starting with the bottom tail parts of the bow, and you're going to sew all of the edges except for the very top. You want to leave that one open, as well as doing the same process for the top bow portion. And I left the more flat edge open for this. And then we can flip each of those inside out. And they're probably going to be a little poofy and not so pretty, so I always like to go back with my iron and iron it all flat. Side note, for the bow top part, the part that is unsewn, I did tuck it inside, so that way now you shouldn't see any frayed edges parts. And then we're going to go to our sewing machine and we're going to close those edges using an overcast stitch for the tail part of the bow. And then for the bow part of the bow that we had pinned the fabric inside, you will use a straight stitch, needle on the right, because you want it to be as close to the edge as possible. Then pin the two pieces together and we can sew it. And I used a straight stitch, sewing with the tail facing upward first so I could see, going in one direction. And then just to ensure that it didn't move on me, I sewed it in the opposite direction going down. Now, all of these stitches should be hid once we put the gem on top of this piece, so don't worry. But before we do that, we do need to attach the bow to the collar. And for this, I just kind of aligned it on top of our white and blue collar where I thought it would be best, pinned it in place, and then I went and did some tack stitching. Using a straight stitch, doing our X in the center so that way it is hidden by the gem later on, as well as doing a little tack on either end of the bow so that way it does not flop around. Then for the closure, and for this I went with doing snaps, and I ended up hand sewing on 4 snaps on the back part. This would make it so I could take it on and off, but you can also do this part at the very, very end. I just happened to do it at this point. And put that now to the side, and we're gonna grab our purple tool and we're gonna work on the purple part of the collar. Cutting it in strips the width of our pattern. I will note I ended up layering this fabric twice, so that way it would be more purpley, followed by ironing and sewing it closed. I then pleated my fabric and once again to the sewing machine, this time using a stretch stitch or lightning bolt stitch. And at this point, you should have a top part and a bottom part, which I then pinned together and sewed with our stretch stitch lightning bolt stitch. And then I proceeded to make the last part, which was going to be a single fold bias tape, or you can just buy it. It just depends on what you want to do. And the last step would be to pin and sew it to the middle section of our purple fabric. And for this, I used a straight stitch, as well as folding and closing our ends on either side. Now, originally I had planned on this purple part not to be permanently attached to the collar, but in the end I was like, it's gonna be better if it's together because then it's not going to move on me. So at this point I ended up pinning it starting in the center and finishing out by sewing it with a straight stitch. And the very last part for finishing out this collar is the gem for the bow. Now for this part, I ended up 3D modeling and printing it, and you can find my CAD file for it on my website, link in the description. And I printed it in PETG filament. You can also make this out of foam and sand it to the shape. There's a bunch of different methods, but this is how I did it. And after printing it and sanding it and cleaning it, I ended up painting it and attaching it to the bow. And for attaching, I like to use contact cement glue. This is the process where you apply it to both the surfaces that you want to attach together, wait for the glue to fully dry, and then attach. Reminder, if you do use contact cement glue, to wear a respirator. And that would complete the collar for my Aqua cosplay. And that, guys, is how to make Aqua's shirt, collar, and her little bow from the anime Konosuba. And I really enjoyed making this cosplay. The entire build took me less than like 10 days, I think. And I was in between C2E2 and going to Alaska for this cosplay. And I'm really happy with how it turned out. And I really hope that this video helped you for making your own version of Aqua. As well as let me know in the comments if I should make another KonoSuba cosplay. Maybe Darkness next? Maybe. Anyway, a big thank you to all of my company sponsors here on YouTube, as well as my members, specifically those legendary members. And I'll see you for our next tutorial, which will be on how to make the skirt for Aqua. So stay tuned.